Hi guys, welcome back to the InfoCast, the one podcast that contains info all about history around the world.
We're your hosts, Rianne
and Annika.
Today we're talking about poverty. And what about poverty, do you ask?
Well, we're going to teach you about what caused it and the various economical, social, and cultural effects that go along with it.
To do that, we first need to discuss some background information regarding it.
Poverty on a global scale was first discovered after the Second World War, but before 1940 it wasn't really an issue. It only became an issue due to heavy war costs that most countries had to bear, which took a toll on the livelihoods of the common people.
Now that we know a little bit, we're going to tell you about the causes, such as little or no access to livelihoods or jobs, conflicts, inequality, poor education, climate change.
Also, lack of infrastructure, limited capacity of the government, and lack of reserves. So now that we know what causes poverty, let's see how we measure/determine the levels of poverty. So to do so, we use something called GDP.
GDP stands for Gross Domestic Product, and it measures the economic output of a country by accounting for its population. It is calculated by dividing the gross domestic product by the population of that country. This is the best measurement to see the standard of living in a country, indicating how prosperous the citizens of a country feel, and it also allows for the comparison of the prosperity of different continents on Earth.
And we can measure GDP per capita of a continent by adding the GDP per capita of each of the countries making up the continent. The same method can be used to find GDP per capita of the world. As of 2016, the world's GDP per capita averaged US $10,300.
Now we're going to be talking about all 7 continents and rank them from most to least in poverty. First, we have Africa as the number 1 continent with the highest levels of poverty, as the continent produces 1,809 GDP per capita. The extreme poverty in Africa has many reasons, some of which are closely linked. Key causes of poverty in Africa and the suffering of millions of people include
growth of population, because population growth on the African continent is rapid despite numerous prevention and education campaigns. Developmental success and economic growth cannot keep pace with this. The result, more and more Africans live in poverty, and according to a recent study by UNICEF, the population of Africa will double by 2050.
Next, we have war and crisis. In the crisis regions, agricultural production usually comes to a standstill. Many people flee, which are forcefully expelled from their homes and are dependent on outside help. Poverty in Africa is increasing as a result of these wars.
Climatic conditions. The African continent has been suffering more and more from climate change in recent decades. These include devastating floods and extraordinary drought periods which lead to crop failures. The consequences are regular hunger crises and famine in Africa. Particularly affected are East Africa and the Sahel region.
So there are inadequate agricultural infrastructures, and there are roads, wells, irrigation systems, storage facilities, and agricultural machinery. In many regions of Africa, agriculture lacks both infrastructure and expertise. That's why local self-help is so important in helping to fight poverty in Africa.
The last reason is unjust trade structures. Rich countries can create unjust trading structures by shielding their own markets with high tariffs and heavily subsidizing their own agriculture. This slows down the development of agriculture on the African continent. And that's how the US, countries of Europe, and other prosperous states contribute to the poverty crisis in Africa with their policies.
Number 2, we have Asia with 5,635 GDPs. The South Asian region comprises of India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Nepal, Sri Lanka, Bhutan, and Maldives. In 1997, accounted for 1/5 of the world's population, 2/3 of its absolute poor, and 1/2 of its illiterate adults. Of the region's 1,191,000,000 inhabitants, 527 million earned less than $1 per day, and 337 million had no access to safe drinking water, and half of the children were underweight. South Asia's annual per capita income of $309 was less than even that of the sub-Saharan Africa, which was $551.
And the first cause of this can be said to be drainage of natural resources. Until 200 years ago, India was the home of cotton textiles, spices, sugar, and precious stones. But its wealth paved the way for its poverty. As European powers colonized the region, they drained many resources, leaving the country essentially bare.
Number 2, we have internal ethnic strife. Although many Asian countries have achieved a steady annual growth rate, it has little impact on income for its population because of ethnic strife that makes defense outlay necessary. Examples of this are India and Pakistan, who spend a high proportion of GDP on defense, with 3.6% in India and 7% in Pakistan.
The third continent is South America with a GDP of 8,520. The first reason is due to unequal distribution of wealth. Rundown slums can exist next to wealthy urban areas due to unequal distribution of economic success. Despite helpful tourism revenue, poverty rates in certain popular areas of South America rise steadily because of this wealth inequality.
Then there is colonialism and racism. In South and Latin America, poverty is partially due to casta, which is a system of racial segregation, determining where they could live, who they could marry, and what jobs they could work in more. It was popularized by early white colonialists in the region, and the lingering effects of it have been among the causes of poverty in South America.
The last cause is education. In South America, the education gap mirrors the income gap between rich and poor. Access to quality education in South America for those living below the poverty line is incredibly rare and difficult to achieve, making it hard for those from poverty to succeed later in life.
The fourth one is Europe with 25,851 GDP. First reason are women who are usually left behind with old men and the children to look after the harvest in areas of seasonal migration. Then certain other occupations, such as notably lace making, were traditionally reserved for women, and in a society where contraception was little known except through abstinence and irregularizations were frowned upon, the tendency to marry late was an indication of poverty.
The fifth continent is Oceania with a GDP of 35,087. And the first reason is undeveloped financial sectors. Areas such as Kiribati, Solomon Islands, and Papua New Guinea all suffer from underdeveloped financial sectors, which hinder the growth of other sectors, and nearly all the enterprises on these islands are privately owned, making it hard for the financial sectors to develop properly.
So number 6 is North America with 37,477 GDPs, and in North America an estimated 98 million people live in poverty. What led to so many people living below the poverty line? Possible causes of poverty in North America ranges from low wages to worker inequality, industry diversification, and a widening gap between the rich and poor. The United States has a 12.7% of population living in poverty, 7.5% of Canadians, and nearly half of Mexico's population living in poverty with 53.3 million people.
So first, poverty in Mexico. Mexico has a severe problem with 45.4% of the population living in poverty. Mexico's tax system benefits the wealthy as it only taxes consumption rather than income. This requires poor citizens to pay higher percentage of their income rather than wealthy citizens.
Poverty in the United States is the situation in the United States with relatively less severe, but the causes of poverty in North America do tend to follow a trend. The United States is one of the world's richest, most powerful, and technologically innovative countries, but neither its wealth nor its power nor its technology is being harnessed to address the situation in which 40 million people continue to live in poverty.
Lastly, poverty in Canada. Canada's 5 most profitable corporations, called the Big Five banks, account for a disproportionate amount of tax avoidance, nearly $5.5 billion in 2016 alone. The biggest factors contributing to poverty in North America are tax laws that ensure loopholes for the rich and an overabundance of low-wage jobs.
To analyze poverty, poverty is a serious global issue that is mainly considered negative as it forces a large portion of the world population to live in horrible conditions with unfair treatment, lack of nutrition, and so much more. However, poverty is not all bad, as there are some positives found due to the existence of the poor. These being that it stands as a motivator for those in society to work hard to achieve a successful, sustainable lifestyle. It also helps cultivate people's sense of empathy to help one another, especially those in need, by donating, volunteering, and much more. These show that poverty is not only full of negatives, but bring a few positives into our society today.
To talk about continuity and change over time, poverty is a concept that has remained prevalent over numerous decades ever since its discovery, as a large portion of the world population today is still in poverty and considered poor. But there have been clear changes over time, like the fact that the median income of households have increased, while the amount of financial funds needed to end poverty has decreased, along with the amount of assistance that is available to those in poverty as well.
To compare and contrast poverty is known to exist everywhere around the world, and the causes for it are different depending on each of the regions.
To conclude, using all our research today, we can conclude that poverty is constantly evolving, but people are evolving too, as recent trends show that poverty is not an unsolvable problem, as the poverty gap is clearly decreasing over time as living standards get higher. To support this, back in 1981, it would have cost $557 billion to raise the incomes of everybody in extreme poverty. But now, in 2013, only an estimated amount of only $160.85 billion is needed to get rid of extreme poverty.
Alright guys, that's it for today.
Thanks for sticking with us today, and make sure to remember to tune in next time to InfoCast. Bye!